fellow bin raiders, and welcome to a new series that I like to call How I Would Write, where I take a game or a prospective sequel and tell you how I would write it because I'm a smartass. This series was inspired by Adam Blompier's series over on What Culture, How I Would Book, and I thought it would be a good idea to take video games and give it a try on this channel. I thought it would be an interesting idea, so let's give it a go, and today we're starting with Mass Effect Andromeda 2. Now, Mass Effect Andromeda, as you may well know, released in 2017 to not very good reviews, and a lot of people made criticism of the poor animation. The facial animations were absolutely terrible. The storyline was rather shallow. It was lacking in good character work. Mass Effect Andromeda wasn't very good, but I'd like to write a sequel that builds on the universe that they set up. So I'm going to make a few rules for this video. Rule number 1 is that I'm not going to change anything or retcon anything as far as I can manage. We're going to be taking Mass Effect Andromeda and we're going to be working on it. Rule number 2 is I'm going to use ideas from the original trilogy. I've based this video mostly on Mass Effect 2 because I think the jump between Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2 was so brilliant, it was so profound that it would be a good idea to mirror that here. We're trying to bring back the hardcore fans, the main fan base. I want to mention that this video is going to have major spoilers for Mass Effect Andromeda and some minor spoilers for the original trilogy, so if you haven't played through the games in their entirety and you don't want anything spoiled, I'd recommend skipping this video. So that's all I've got to say. I think we should just jump in. Mass Effect Andromeda 2. EA and BioWare, do it better. Or at all. Fuck. So the sequel starts us off back in the Tempest as we know it. Ryder's still there. But it's been a few months and the whole hype of what Ryder did and Meridian has died down, and things are getting back to normal. Intergalactic politics are starting to take over and bureaucracy. There is going to be a twist that the humans have now colonized Meridian, and there is a human councillor who is rather xenophobic, and he thinks, well, we got there first, we crashed our ark into it first, we're going to colonize it because that's what humanity does, and this doesn't sit well with a lot of the other species. He wants to get a strong foothold for humanity in Andromeda. Whether we support that or not is a side plot I wanted to make known. I'm going to be focusing mostly on Ryder, but anything I think is important I will be adding. So Ryder is still on the Tempest. The twin, your twin in the game is going to be a part of Nexus Security, and they're going to take up that post and help the people coming out of cryo and refugees, finding them new colonies and golden worlds to start to repopulate and grow. So they're going to be a part of that, and they're going to be an integral part of the story, giving us the more human side, the more perspective on what's happening on the Nexus. The twin is also going to have to deal with new reports that the Ket, although their leader is dead, the Archon is dead. There is going to be some issues with them. They are going to start attacking colonies, and not only that, they're starting to kidnap people. Meanwhile, on the Tempest, the crew is very, very small. It's basically a skeletal crew at the moment. Because of the problems with humanity and the Ket still being an issue at the moment, the defense budget and the budget for the Tempest has been massively cut. So there will be a skeletal crew there. The pilot will still be there. I can't remember his name. The picture will be here somewhere. You've got the human crew. They're still there. Maybe Lexi's still there, but Vetra, Drax, PB, they're all off doing their own thing. So it's just a very minimal crew. With tension so high, Director Tan thinks it's time to finally find the Quarians. Hashtag save the Quarians. Finally, we're going to go after the Keeler CR, the Ark that was lost. And they decide that Ryder and their small crew should be the ones to do it. So Director Tan says, Ryder, we need you to go and find the Keeler CR. We could use the Quarians, we could use their technology, we could use the manpower. Go and find them. And that's where the game starts heading in the first half. So Ryder and the crew finally make it to the Keeler CR Ark. And It looks pretty operational, it looks strangely intact, but they find quite a large hole in the side of the hull, and they're like, oh, what the fuck is that? But it looks space-worthy, it looks like it'll be able to fly, it's all a bit of a mystery, and this is where things start off rather creepy. Mass Effect has done creepy here and there, but this needs to be very creepy. We're talking the start of Dead Space creepy. They dock into the loading bay and everything's dark. Maybe there's some signs of struggle, maybe there's some blood splatters, maybe there's some bullet holes, but it all looks very untouched. It all looks like the entire ship has been raided and everything is lost in time. There'll be mysterious lights and shadows, there'll be logs being played of people screaming and shouting, so everything's going to be very spooky. With no signs of life, Ryder and the crew turn the corner and finally they see something in the distance, a silhouette, something limbering out from a corner, and they wonder, oh, what the fuck is that? And they call over to it and it starts to head towards them. It notices them and they see that this is a very familiar figure, and it's very slender, it's very lithe, it looks like a Quarian, and this thing lumbers towards them very slowly. And it has Quarian features, but you see like burning eyes through the visor, and the visor's cracked, and as it gets closer and closer, this thing looks like a monstrosity. It's mutated. It looks like it's got bulging flesh out of its helmet, and it looks corrupted almost. And Ryder and the crew are forced to take it down. And we find out from this that the Ket are starting to experiment on people. So this Quarian thing attacks them, and because the Quarians were carrying other races, we get attacked by other things like the Elcor. When in the original game, the Ket started converting Krogan to become those behemoth-like enemies. So the Elcor could be like these big armored brutes, and you've got like fucking I don't know, Drell as like stealthy enemies, like sneaking up behind you as like assassin-like enemies, and you can have, I don't know, Hanar flying about the room as the jellyfish do. I don't know, throwing biotics, I don't know. It's going to be interesting variants in enemies, unlike the first Andromeda did. The Ket were quite boring. They fight their way to this large area, the large living area before the bridge, and they see this strange thing floating above the room, and it is this blob, this monstrous thing, this nightmare fuel of what looks to be flesh and wiring, you know, veins and circuitry, blood and oil. This thing is just a disgusting, grotesque mess, this mix of technology and organic matter, and it's horrifying. And they see below that there's a circle of Ket praising this thing, and Ryder's very confused, the crew's very confused, and suddenly this sort of thing in the Ket notice them, and it lets out this high-pitched shriek that only they seem to hear, and they're buckling, they're seeing hallucinations, they're confused. You know, this thing is like psychically, biotically attacking them, and then this thing sort of notices Ryder. It looks at Ryder, sort of a twitch is what we see. Nothing major, but just a and with that, it leaves the same way it came, through that massive hole. It leaves the ship, leaving Ryder to sort of recover with the crew. A gunfight starts and they kill the Ket, and they finally make it to the bridge. Within the bridge, they find a few Quarian survivors. They find some Elcor, they find some Hanar. There's a few of them left. The Ket went through some of the pods and was taking people out and converting them, but mostly the Quarians are okay. They've lost a lot of people, but there is enough. The Quarians, the Elcor, the Hanar return to the Nexus. The Ark is driven back to the Nexus, and the other races, the Elcor, the Hanar, the Drell, they are absolutely furious. You know, I mean, these people are scared. You know, they're really afraid that they've lost their people, they've lost families, they've lost friends. So, without the permission of the Quarians, these leaders of the race, the Volus, the Hanar, the Drell, the Elcor, they go to the cryopod bay, and they open all the cryopods at once, and they release all of the members of their races, flooding the Nexus with refugees who are confused, they're scared, you know, they've just been out of cryosleep and they're in this new galaxy, they're absolutely afraid. So that could be a problem for the Twin to sort out. It gives us a bit of drama early in the story. Meanwhile, Ryder is in a discussion with the heads of the Nexus, and they tell them that, you know, there was this thing there. I don't know what it is, but, you know, I plan to find out. It's very powerful. I need my ship. I need to be able to, you know, track this thing down. And Director Tan, being the arsehole that Director Tan is no. I want people defending shit because, you know, we've got these Ket. abducting people. Our colonists are very scared. We need you to defend them. Ultimately, the heads of the Nexus decide that it might be best to find out what this thing is, to give Ryder, you know, their ship back, give them the budget that they need to get their crew back, to find out what this thing is and to put a stop to it, because the Quarians maybe corroborate this story and corroborate that the Ket are dangerous, and this thing could lead them to stopping the Ket once and for all. So begrudgingly, Director Tan's like, okay, I'm going to be chill for once. Go ahead, Ryder. Here you go. This follows on as a search for the crew. Ryder goes about the various worlds and the Helios cluster, and maybe outside the Helios cluster as well. We can move out of just that very small place with this game, visit a few new worlds. We don't want to rehash the old worlds from the old game. We find Vetra, we find PB, we find Drax. They all come back. We'll find a few more people as well, because Mass Effect 2 was chocked full of teammates to interact with, and I think Mass Effect Andromeda tried really hard to have this interaction between crew members, and you know, these like inter crew member emails and the movie night, and I want more of that. So let's have more people have conflicting personalities, fights to break up and disputes, have some drama in the Tempest, so we have something to do outside of missions, because that's what people loved about the original Mass Effect trilogy. It was a space opera. It was a soap opera in a starship, and that's what we want to bring back with this one. Play to the fans, play to what they want. With the crew assembled, we go through the regular things. We go through the loyalty missions, we go through exploration, and I would do this rather differently than Mass Effect Andromeda did. I wouldn't have huge open worlds where you have to drive that fucking Nomad to fetch quests to and fro. It was incredibly boring and time consuming, especially with all the loading times. I want it more like, it would be good to have it like Habitat 7 when you first went down. So it's an open level, and there might be a few quests and places you need to go, and a few different routes to take. You could, you know, charge head on or go through a mountain range or something like that, but we don't want that big wide open spaces that are just empty and you have to drive through. It was very, very boring, so let's make this a bit more linear. With Ryder and the crew travelling around, they start hearing of this Jardaan, and it slowly becomes this bigger picture, that this thing that they found on the Keeler CR, this monstrous thing that the Ket seem to worship and adore, this thing is a Jardaan. This is the creators of the Meridian and the remnants. You know, this ancient race is still around, and they don't know what the connection is yet. But we hear about the Jardaan, and we hear about the Ket's plans, and we hear about this Geln character, and we heard about this in Andromeda, the Geln, and we don't know what this is and what it's connected to, but we slowly learn about Scourge. Scourge wasn't touched upon as much in Andromeda, and it's that crystalline structure that they ran the bloody Ark into at the start, and this is dark energy, but it's found almost everywhere in Andromeda, and it's found in remnant structures and in the vaults, and you can see in Andromeda 1 that the Scourge is attracted to remnant structures, as if they're like they coexist with each other, and the vaults use Scourge to purge that cloud you run from in Andromeda 1. That is Scourge energy, this dark energy that sort of destroys all organic matter, and we don't know what's so important about it yet, but it plays a bigger role in this game. We reach our first point of no return in the fact that we learn that Geln is something that can stop the Jardaan. We learn that Geln is an enemy of the Jardaan. We learn that Geln literally means traitor in their language. It's something that they need to find, and it could help them with this new menace, with the Ket, stopping the Ket and this dark underplot. And they find out that Geln is on this abandoned planet outside the Helios cluster, and they travel their way there. Now this is a very important mission, and perhaps we could have, if you've been romancing up until this point, your love interest goes, I want to be there with you when we find this is really important. This will show us the whole history of the Andromeda galaxy. Or if you haven't romanced anyone, we could just have the twin saying, you know, I want to be there, I want to help you, this is what Dad would have want. So Ryder, the twin or the love interest, and a crew member head down to this planet, and in this cavern they find what looks to be an ancient AI. What we were told was Angaran on Vold in the first one. It's actually Jardaan or Jardanian in Origin, and we find this huge AI spanning caverns upon caverns, miles underground, this massive thing. And Sam tries to interface and goes, I can't get a connection with this thing. It's, but I might be able to put you inside of this AI, so we can find out data that way, like they did in Mass Effect and Mass Effect 3 with the Geth database. Ryder is brought into this digital world, and they find, staring back at them, a Jardaan. And it turns out Jeln is a Jardaan. Jeln, this traitor, is a member of the Jardaan race, and they're crazy. They've been in isolation for so long that they're mental. They've been trapped in this computer, and they start to explain all of the backstory. Maybe it could be through a walking segment or something just a bit more interactive. Jeln explains that the Jardaan were the first sapient species of the Andromeda Galaxy, or the Helios cluster. They were the first ones to discover interstellar travel, and they were the first ones to start to create synthetics. Just as the Quarians did with the Geth, just as races have always done in the endless cycle, organics create synthetics. And the Jardaan had their conflicts with these synthetics that ultimately tried to destroy them. This is the cycle that the original trilogy has always talked about. Organics creating synthetics, synthetics overthrowing organics and creating mass destruction, and the cycle going over and over again. And the Jardaan explained that they went through cycle after cycle after cycle until they became one and the same. Symbiosis. The Jardaan were the first race to be able to merge organics and synthetics, as we saw in the Mass Effect 3 original ending, the neutral ending. They achieved perfect symbiosis. With this, the Jardaan started to lose their morality. They believed themselves to be gods. They brought about this perfect union of mechanical and biological. They became bigger than all of those cycles that came before, when they destroyed themselves. They had risen above that. They had become their own gods, and with that they started to lose their morality. They became monstrous. Like the Protheans, the Jardaan took races that were below them and they absorbed them almost literally into their culture, into what it meant to be a Jardaan, and they became monstrous. They became disgusting, cybernetic things. They decided to truly become gods. They had to play gods. And the Andromeda Galaxy, or the Helios cluster, maybe per cluster, are just giant experiments. Jeln explains that Jardaan created a cluster-wide, a galaxy-wide experiment with 3 separate races. They created the Remnant, an entirely mechanical, machine-like race, to be the sort of caretakers of this experiment, where they can intervene where the Jardaan were trying to stay out. Their sort of remote access to these experiments. Second species is the Ket, fully biological. They use genetic enhancements to take other species and make them as a part of the Ket. They are a fully biological species. They don't use synthetics whatsoever. Maybe they use AI in their weaponry. I didn't remember it in Andromeda, but I'm going to say that the Ket are just almost fully biological. That's what they do. And then we have the mix, which, okay, this might be pushing it. The Angara can sort of interface with electricity, so maybe that's sort of a little mix between the mechanical and the biological. It's a bit of a push, but the Angara are sort of like the control between the two. Jeln was one of the members of the Jardaan that had a conscience, that decided, no, this isn't right. I haven't lost my morality. This is wrong. We shouldn't be playing God. We shouldn't be using these races to make our own experiments. This is sick. Jeln decided to try and stop them, and for its crimes, Jeln was confined to this AI, taken from its form, its body destroyed, and isolated in this huge mainframe, left alone for decades, centuries, eons even. Jeln then mentions that the experiment was closed. It means that there was no outside interference until the Nexus arrived, until the Arcs arrived, until other species made their way into Andromeda, which is what the Jardaan found out, maybe from the Remnant, and the experiment was ruined. There were new species that were in the galaxy. This would explain why we only see Remnant, Ket, and Angara. We only see those 3 races. That's the only alien races we saw in Andromeda. It's sort of a good way to explain how lazy the design team must have been. But when the Milky Way galaxy species entered Andromeda, that ruined the experiment, and the Jardaan decided that they would reset everything and start again. And they reset everything with something that the Geln, that this crazy person, calls the Great Reset. He speaks almost tribalistically now. He talks about this failsafe, this Great Reset, this way of purging the entire Helios cluster, the entire Andromeda galaxy of all life, apart from the Remnant, who can be reused for the next experiment. So the failsafe would activate all the vaults and release this scourge energy on every single planet around the galaxy and destroy absolutely all biological life, resetting the experiment. And that failsafe is found, and suddenly we're cut out. Ryder wakes up on the floor of the cabin, very groggy, having been sort of immediately disconnected from this interface, to the sound of lasers and gunfire, and is being dragged away by one of the crew members behind a rock into cover. And they don't know what's going on. Ryder's looking about what's happening, and the crew members, the Ket are here, and they're storming into the cavern. And it turns out that when Ryder was out, they were able to disable and pull away the love interest or the twin, whichever one it was, and they've abducted them. And Ryder's starting to get their senses back, and this is where we see Ryder become desperate. Like, oh, we can't lose them, we need to get them back, and they start becoming reckless. Ryder shoots out from the rock and, taking out the Ket, and is just mowing them all down. We're rushing through out of this cavern, out towards the planet's surface, and as soon as Ryder and the crew member gets outside, we see a Ket ship fly off into the distance. The love interest, or the twin, is gone. Ryder has lost them. So that's all I can do for the first part of this. It's going to be a long video. I've got a lot more ideas to talk about. If you're liking it, please subscribe. The next part is coming out very, very soon. I hope you're enjoying it so far. Tell me what you think down below. But that's all for now, Bin Raiders. Keep bin raiding, and I'll see you next time.